We are talking today about a tweet, one of the best Street Fighter 6 players, maybe the best right now, and certainly the best Street Fighter 5 player, the two-time Capcom Cup champion MenaRD, has tweeted saying that Street Fighter 6 is the scrubbiest Street Fighter he has ever played. There's more to the story than that, but hot damn, when you have a player of this caliber saying something like this about the game, you set the community on fire, which is exactly what's going on Twitter right now. People are talking left and right about the issues with Street Fighter 6, as this game has been hailed as an amazing, almost flawless game, and at least it feels like that's implied, and now all of a sudden we have some issues with the game. So I want to dig in here before we dig farther into the tweets and what the people are saying. Go around the horn and ask you guys, do you think Street Fighter 6 is the scrubbiest Street Fighter you've ever played? Steven.
Oh, we're starting with me. The scrubbiest Street Fighter game we've ever played? No, definitely not. I took pretty big issue with seeing what Mena wrote there, just because I don't know how anybody could say Street Fighter 6 is the scrubbiest Street Fighter game when Street Fighter 5 exists. It just doesn't make sense to me. It just blows my mind. I know there's some similarities between the games and stuff like that, but my God, man, Street Fighter 5 is a thing. It's real. It exists. It existed. We lived through it. We survived it. How can Street Fighter 6 be the scrubbiest when Street Fighter 5 is a thing? I don't quite understand it, but I would say Street Fighter 6 definitely not the scrubbiest.
All right, John, what do you think about Street Fighter 6? Is it the scrubbiest?
It's so the big issue I think comes down to Drive Rush, and you guys know me. I've been complaining about Drive Rush since the beta, and I think that it takes too little meter to do. I think a quarter carry, all that other kind of stuff. So my short answer is no, but there are some qualifiers here that need to be addressed. I think Street Fighter 6 is a better version of 5, to be very clear about this. I don't agree with people that say that 5 is hands down the most scrubby version in the franchise. That goes to 4, hands down to me. But yeah, it's I don't think Mena's off base here at all. He probably could have put a few more qualifiers and nuance in there, but that is Twitter. Twitter does not have qualifiers and nuance on it at all.
Yeah, he did follow up and said, this seems like it took a little bit of the heat off of the initial statement that he made. He says, I just said Street Fighter 6 is scrubby right now, and I hope it improves like 5 did over the years. Seasons 1 to 3 of SF5 were bad too. I'm going to play the game regardless, but we need to be able to discuss these things and not kill each other. SF6 is fun, but scrubby. But he did exactly say this is the scrubbiest game I've ever played. He put send, so it's out there in the ether now. As far as my thoughts, no, I do not think this is the scrubbiest Street Fighter game, but I will say, as I started to try to dig into this and consider, well, where exactly am I at with this? I will say I never feel like I have a match or a round won until it says KO, meaning that anybody can bring things back, anybody can make it happen in this game, and that's interesting because that's very close to, well, it's too easy and everyone can just press the shoot the nuclear missile button and win, and I'm not saying that that's what happens in Street Fighter 6, but there's certainly some element of that, or it's at least close to that, and that's what I want to kind of dig in further. So as we look at it here, what would make Street Fighter 6 specifically scrubby? The things that people are talking about right now, I see 3 things floating to the top. Drive Rush being too strong, dropped inputs from things like the Drive Rush screen freezes, and then throw loops in the corner just being so much of the meta and so overpowered. But let's focus in on that Drive Rush first of all. John, you've been talking about Drive Rush for a really long time, since we kind of first saw it, and you were the one, I think, that was saying, oh man, this looks like it's going to be the thing that makes or breaks this game. This is what the meta is going to be based around. How are you feeling about Drive Rush in terms of it being too strong or not?
It's very clearly too strong. The dropped inputs, one, are completely unacceptable, and whoever at Capcom let that go by needs to be whooped on the butt or something like that, because it's like you should never have a mechanic that purposely drops out other people's inputs when you're trying to react to it, especially something that's heavily dependent on reactions to defend against it.
Yeah.
And I'm so disappointed in Capcom for not addressing the input eating issue with Drive Rush. That is like inexcusable if you ask me. So like right then and there, I think you have to address that. The other one is is like you start seeing some of the neutral drive rush combos, because that's where it costs a bar, and they do full corner carry. And in Street Fighter 6, you do not want to be in the corner. That's where throw loops and all this other kind of stuff we're going to talk about become way more potent, all this other kind of stuff. And you've got the ability to just completely push people into the corners with most of the characters. I don't know if all of them, but I think most of them have very long drive rush combos that don't spend all of your thing, don't put you into burnout. And that's just too much. Drive rush right now in neutral should be about 2 bars or a bar and a half, something like that. It should cost more than it does right now.
So is it, am I right in hearing that it's more about the cost than it is necessarily the utility? Would you change the utility, or would you just make it more expensive to do the same things it does now, but also get rid of those dropped inputs?
Exactly that. I would keep it as is right now, because I don't feel like it's super broken. It just needs to take more resources up from people at this moment. And the big reason why is I'm a Third Strike player. I've been playing Street Fighter since the Street Fighter 2 era, and Third Strike got very boring and very methodical, and something like Drive Rush really helps break up the neutral and the other play and stuff. And I get why fundamental footsie hardcore people hate something like Drive Rush. I understand that, but the game is going to be way too boring, way too neutral based if you don't have something like Drive Rush be impactful in this game.
Steven, tell me about Drive Rush.
Yeah, so early on, I felt that Drive Rush wasn't too crazy, because obviously we're playing the betas and stuff like that. But I did agree that if there was going to be a sore thumb to Street Fighter 6 after launch, it could potentially be raw Drive Rush. I agree that it probably needs to be toned down in terms of how much resources it uses, like maybe cost more in neutral for raw Drive Rushes. But I'm a little bit worried about doing that, because in combos and stuff, you're going to lose a lot of the swaggy, cool, extended combos that we like to do right now. And yes, they do, push you to the corner and stuff like that, but depending on how it's set up, you're killing a lot of your resources there. So yes, you can get that corner advantage, but the other side of it is you're closer to burnout now. So there is, consequence for doing it, and I wouldn't like to see the combos and stuff kind of get pulled back, because we just came from a game where the extended combos and stuff outside of a handful of characters just wasn't a thing. And that was something for me personally where I'm like, it affected my interest in Street Fighter 5, right? So I would be remiss to see, Drive Rush get cost more and then have those combos suffer as a result, right? The other thing I think that we kind of aren't taking into consideration is perfect parry. As this game evolves, perfect parry might become a major thing. It's already starting to kind of sprout up. And if we get to a point where that becomes something that's super developed, the raw Drive Rush stuff might kind of not go out the window, but might become really regulated at higher levels. And of course, it'll still be an issue for people at lower levels, but if that's kind of where the meta goes, if they don't tweak it and then we get perfect parry kind of popping up and becoming this big thing, I could see it kind of balancing out more. It's still kind of scrubby, but there would be a direct counter to it, and the high-level players would have that on lock.
So we've talked about the cost of Drive Rush, which currently, if you're doing it just in the neutral, it's only 1 bar of your 6-bar gauge. If you do it in the midst of a block string, or you cancel out of a move, I should say, then it costs 3 bars, which is half of your drive gauge. I don't think anyone's worried about that. But we talked about cost. Would you guys do anything in order to balance it when it comes to the advantages that it gives you? Because when you Drive Rush in, the next move gets +4 extra frame advantage on block or on hit, which makes new combos possible and which makes better pressure. So it's a ton of advantage when you do this move. Would you guys touch the frame data aspect of it, or are we just looking at meter cost and maybe getting rid of this dropped inputs? John.
Again, I would keep it as is, but the one thing I might look at is how fast Drive Rush starts up to make it a little bit more reactable, maybe slow it down by a frame or two, and maybe the distance that it travels. But for starters, though, I would just hit the resources and other stuff, because I don't want to nerf Drive Rush so much where it's not a feature in the game, like a hardcore one. Drive Rush needs to be in Street Fighter 6. It is a very, very, very important mechanic, and it is something that developers have heavily baked into every aspect except for Lily, because screw her. But besides that, I think it's a really important mechanic that has to be featured in this game.
Should it be universal in terms of how far and fast it goes? Because it varies from character to character. DJ can basically teleport to you from anywhere on screen, and unless you're already happen to be pushing a button, you don't have time to push a button.
Yeah, some characters need a better drive rush. I don't know if they like Cammy and Jury need as good of drive rushes or DJ as they have, but you might tweak it a little bit on those characters, and you might make Lily's actually functional and work. That might be you could actually make Lily functional and work.
Just overall, right?
Nice,
that would be nice.
Yeah. You could actually make her a decent character. And then one thing, of course, this is always going to come up in the comments. People are like, event scrubs and all this other kind of stuff. All of us here are Master Rank players. John's a Master Rank JP. I'm a Master Rank JP. Diamond 5 Guile. Got 2 characters almost at Master. And then Steven's a Master Rank Lily. So we're all very adept and competent players and have all been playing these fighting games for quite some time now. So just a heads up for people in the comments. And also leave your discussion stuff below. We love those comments as well. So.
Yeah.
But also keep them coming. Just know.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Keep them coming.
Steven, what do you think about the ideas of altering drive rush outside of the meter taking, or of the cost, I should say?
I think that if you increase the cost of it, so say if you did something where you made a change where raw drive rush and neutral cost 2 bars to use, but you kept the frame advantage and stuff, that feels like a fair trade-off. Now, I would like to kind of, like what I was saying about combos before, I would like to see Capcom maybe do something where maybe drive rush, like raw drive rushes in combos, like if you're juggling and stuff, still only cost 1 bar. So like if you've already hit something and you're juggling and then you do a raw drive rush, maybe it only costs 1 bar so you don't lose all of the cool combos that we have right now. But if you're doing it as a pressure tool raw, like for Oki or just to get in, make that cost 2 bars. Because now you're getting that frame advantage, but you're cooking a lot of your resources and you can't just keep doing it. You get 3 of those and you're in burnout, right? Whereas right now you get 6 of those and Jury just gets to do it all day after throwing you or knocking you down. Then she gets 3 medium punches and you're just eating it all day, right? So maybe that would be the change that I would like. If we had to change it now, I'd say that's probably what I would suggest doing. But again, I'm kind of curious where the perfect parry stuff is kind of going to go.
Mm-hmm. What about the idea of just scaling the damage that happens if you do a raw drive rush and you start a combo from that? Then it scales, you know?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good example there, John, that this is what Capcom sometimes does, where it's like, okay, we expect them to take, the left route, and they end up taking the right route, and it's something that you just suggested there, where it's like, oh, damage scaling is a big deal now, and that's huge because we know with stuff like Perfect Parry scales like 50% of the damage right as soon as you do the next one, so they have very specifically made Perfect Parries not a extremely good option in this game. They're very good in some circumstances, but the damage scaling is nutty on them, extremely high.
Mm-hmm. Mena went further in on this, and I should say clarified a little bit more. And this is another tweet that came up recently. It's not that crazy if you compare as a fighting game competitor, and he lists these 4 things: inputs that don't come out, unreactable dashes, and I think that that's a pretty big thing here, because I don't see where he's directly talked about like the specifics of drive rush, but I think that is what he's talking about here, and that's what a lot of other top players are talking about. But unreactable dashes, inputs that don't come out, guess for your life in the corner, and then generally unbalanced. So I do think that unreactable dashes is kind of the main thing here, and a lot of these other things sort of are more dependent on that. But I don't. Where is the scrubbiness that we're seeing? Is it in the ability to suddenly get close? And are we skipping neutral? Is it that because to me, I feel like there are so many things that you have to juggle, right? Because yes, there's drive rush, but also they could jump forward, they could DI, they could just play footsies. And if they're a character that has forward horizontal things, if you're playing against Honda or Blanca or whomever, then you're dealing with their special moves or their fireballs. And by the time you're trying to be ready for everything, drive rush emerges as such a dominant thing to do that really that's where the game is being won or not, and the other things are just kind of like little extra fluff around, something like that. And I'm not sure that that's where the game is at, but that feels like that's the argument that's being generally made. When Mena says it means that the layers needed to win at the highest level right now are not a lot. The basic mechanics of the game seem too strong, and anybody that figures that out means trouble. Meaning, and that's where he's talking about the scrubbiness. Someone asked him, what does it mean that it's scrubby? He says it means that the layers needed to win are not that complicated, and it's easy to figure it out, and then just do the thing that's good. So it's like, as long as I know how to drive rush and manipulate drive rush and play around with that, I don't really have to care about all of these other things, because when it all plays out in the aggregate, the ability to use drive rush well is what's going to win. Do you guys agree with that's where the game is at right now, Steven?
I mean, there's a case to be made for it, but I did take issue with that part of the statement that Mena made where he's saying, like, it doesn't take a lot of the layers, or it doesn't take a lot of layers to win at that level and to understand this game, because it's like all we've been talking about since we've gotten our hands on this game, and I mean the community collectively, is the mental stack of Street Fighter 6 and how many options you have, and this feeling of, like, even when you lose, you go, man, there was a direct counter that I could have done there and I didn't do it, right? So that was a little bit weird to hear where he's like, oh, it's so simple. And he's basically saying, like, if you know these certain things and it's not much that you need to know, you can be a dominant threat in this game. And it doesn't feel like that. And of course, Mena probably knows more about this game, at least at that level, than I do. But that was where I kind of took issue with that. And again, this whole narrative about this game being the scrubbiest and being scrubby in general, it's possible for a fighting game to have scrubby things and not be overall scrubby, or not overall be the scrubbiest, right? Every fighting game has scrubby things. It's part of what we... If fighting games didn't have scrubby things, there'd be no flavor to these games. There'd be nothing, right? It wouldn't be fun. That's part of the fun of this, but it feels like a very extreme take of, like, oh, Drive Rush, the implication that Drive Rush is too strong. Obviously, Mena didn't say it outright, but he's kind of saying that, right? It feels like there's a big issue with that, and it's kind of being used to kind of just... It's like being used as a blanket statement. It's like, oh, this game is too scrubby now. And it's like, well, why don't we just work on fixing that one thing, and then maybe this game isn't as scrubby as he thinks, right? But, like,
well, and that's what everyone is responding with right now, that, hey, we are a month into the game. Yeah. Every vanilla version of every Street Fighter has a bunch of jank that they figure out. It's usually the worst iteration of a game when you look back on it, because they had the time to learn and see, and you see damage almost always scaled down in the second update, and the stuff that sticks out. But and I'm sure that Capcom will attend to a lot of these things in Street Fighter 6. The biggest thing for me right now is those damn screen freezes. I really like when that happens to you. The level of frustration that spikes out in your heart is just ugh. But I do think that I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. John, what do you think in terms of Street Fighter 6 being too scrubby through the Drive Rush mechanic or not?
It's so Mena's putting this out there as a former Capcom co-chap and probably the best player alive right now. That's going to get attention, and that's going to get Capcom's attention specifically. And this might get Capcom to address it, where if he put on a more nuanced take, a more like, oh, here's a more relaxed and, other, point of view, Capcom might have just ignored it. This is something that got our attention. It's got a lot of other people's attention. I don't blame him for putting it out there in this regard, because this is going to help get it addressed. And again, I've been talking about this since the beta, where Drive Rush is just, it's too good, and a few other people have, but they wanted to get the final product in their hands. All good. I understand this stuff, but I mostly agree with where Mena's coming from on this, that there's some very clear parts of this game that need to be altered. And again, it's just like we talked about the input stuff. Drive Rush, again, it's just like, man, like being able to put someone in the corner in this game is so advantageous. It is incredibly good, so strong, and you have a mechanic that lets you corner carry with basically every character in the game and push someone there. And regardless if it's cool swaggy combos or not, that is not fundamentally something you want to let people just do just for hitting you one time, kind of thing. And it's way too strong. And I give Capcom credit for designing something that's interesting. This does remind me a lot of the Alpha 2 custom combos and all that from back in the day. Those were extremely hard to react to as well. I put a clip up of that even from the beta of Chun-Li doing a full screen, basically Drive Rush into death, kind of thing. And I knew this was coming. But I also knew that Capcom would address it at some point in time. I'm not too worried about this being a long-term issue. I just wish they would have addressed it a little sooner rather than later.
Let me ask you this. I want to go around the horn here. How often do you think the more skilled player wins in Street Fighter 6 thus far? John?
Okay, so one of the biggest things about this game is you pick someone like Cammy and Jury, and you can lock someone into a one-player game. And that one-player game can be so dominant and so strong, and you're in the corner and stuff, and if you don't react perfectly or you don't read the situation perfectly, you are dead. You have more resources in this game than any other Street Fighter game that start with. Maybe Alpha 3 is an exception, but I think in this game you have more resources to start with that drive gauge. And so your ability to pin someone down and knock them the hell out in seconds is stronger than maybe any other time in Street Fighter history. And so I think that lends itself to a little bit of randomness that players don't like. and also have not fully accounted for just yet. I think that with some time, what we learned from Street Fighter V is that if you can figure out how to defend in Street Fighter V, you can figure out how to defend in any fighting game. I don't care what game it is, it's Marvel or whatever, you can figure out how to put yourself in spots where you're not going to get random out as much. But to answer your question, I would say the better player probably at this point in time wins about 65 to 70% of the time. And that number really should be about 80%. But again, the randomness of some of the stuff in here is not good.
I feel like the randomness really shows in the corner with throw loops because of how much time it takes for throws to recover in this. You really are in something of a 50-50 if someone is up in your face and threatening the throw loop or a neutral jump, because if they do that neutral jump and you go for the throw tech, you're getting a full combo still in the corner and forever, however many resources they have to spend on that combo into the same situation over again. I'm not sure how I feel about what they should do about throw loops in the corner right now, because the argument is like, of course it was bad and something they got rid of in Street Fighter V, but this is a different game with different mechanics and different abilities to defend yourself from a lot of different things. And I'm a JP player. Hey, I have a special that stops throws as well. That all said, that game, I'm trying to dig into why it feels so simple. For why these pros are saying the game is easy to figure out and then you can just do the easy thing and put people in the 50-50 mix-up. And I think that's where it feels like it's right when I say that I'm never comfortable against anybody, because someone can so quickly put me in the corner and then basically do this easy 50-50 that's going to either take a throw and repeated throws or half of my life into the same situation again. So I think as we try to drill down on what is it that we're specifically talking about, that's a big part of it. But Steven, how often do you think the better player wins in Street Fighter 6 right now?
That's a tough question, because going back to what we were talking about before of like knowing that they're like being able to recognize that there are direct counters to a lot of these situations, and a lot of times like something unique about this game I feel is like, at least something I hadn't felt in a fighting game in a long time, is like when I lose, I feel like I know exactly why I lost. It's not necessarily that I feel cheated. It's like, oh, I missed that drive impact, or I should have set that up better, or I overextended.
I went for the throw.
I went for the
getting
throw.
thrown 6 times, and that's the time they jumped. And it's
Sure.
like, but it was just it was a guessing game, and
Sure.
I mean that's part of fighting games. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Before you move on that, I just want to point out that we had some Daigo versus Shudo footage. Shudo's playing Marissa with modern controls, and he throws Daigo like 5 times in a row, and on the 6th time, Daigo like does a wake up and finally gets him and stuff. So we're not just talking about like a theoretical, throw loops are like, good at like lower levels or something like that. We're talking about 2 very high-end players that are suffering hardcore from throw loops, and shout out to Daigo, he likes getting throw loops. But Steven, you were saying.
Sure, yeah, and I will kind of say on that note, like, I'm not defending throw loops because they probably shouldn't be in the game. Throw loops in that kind of situation probably don't belong in any fighting game, or at least any Street Fighter game, if I'm being honest, like, because it's a little bit too much of it's too much reward and too little risk kind of thing. It feels
it's vortex,
like Yeah, it's a vortex, exactly, and it probably doesn't belong in there. And if that's one of, like, if I needed to call for a change right now for Street Fighter 6, we probably get rid of throw loops. I mean, I wouldn't miss them. I don't use them. I play Lily, like, I have better things that I should be trying to do instead of throw loops, and I think I need meter to set it up. Anyway, I would say probably get rid of them. But in terms of just kind of the overall and like how often is the better player winning? Maybe 70%. Like, I would probably give it a little bit higher, maybe 75, because again, I kind of go back to this idea of like, you can call what went wrong in a lot of instances. Like, say if you're not, like, even taking out of the equation, like, you got throw loop to death, or, Jury kept doing raw drive rush and you just guessed wrong every time, right? Like, even in those situations, you do have counters, you have things you can hold parry, and it's a mix up, but everything in, everything in fighting games is a read and a guess, right? Like, you have to determine what your opponent wants to do and choose your best option, right? But like, I do feel like more often than not, like, I'm not walking away from the game going like, I got completely robbed, or I got cheated there, or whatever. Like, I always feel like it's like, man, like, I messed that up, or I dropped my big combo when I had the opportunity, or whatever. And so it's like, in that instance, the better player kind of won, because I wasn't on point. It was on me, right? And sometimes the answer is do less and let them do these things and hang themselves, right? But like, I feel like I'm losing to random more because I made a mistake, or I didn't know the right counter, even though there is a counter, right? Versus, again, in a throw loop situation where you feel like I know the counters. It was just too ridiculous to even get to that, right? Like, it doesn't feel like that's a major part of the game for me right now. Whereas in a game like Street Fighter V, that felt like it was a lot of the game. Where it was like, I just got put into this horrible situation, and it's just so obviously not in my favor. Like, I'm just one guess and I'm screwed, right? And it's like, well, there it goes. So I don't feel like that's the case in this game. There are definitely instances where it can feel like that, but I don't think it's a major part of the game, at least not yet. At least, and again, at least from my experience and from what I've seen, you can definitely create some of those situations, but there's so many defensive options and different things you can do. You can usually, for the most part, find your way out. There are don't get me wrong, there are definitely scenarios where you can get overwhelmed, get rolled, and you just got thrown 10 times and GG's, right? It happens, but I don't feel like that's the major, like, overarching part of this game, at least not right now.
Yeah, I think I come down on it being the better player winning about 65 to 70% of the time. And I know we're talking about, is this game scrubby, and we're trying to highlight the mustard stains on shirt, so to speak. Everybody's going with, I love it. It's great. It's better than SF5, especially at the beginning of SF5. You're comparing month 1 to month 1, no contest. But there is something that's not quite sitting right. And I do think that, yeah, it's something like 65, 70% of the time. I agree with you, Steven, that it still feels like, yeah, I see why I lost, and it wasn't completely unfair, but maybe it wasn't really decided by skill. It was decided by a kind of coin flip, not fully, you know, but to an extent that people aren't super happy with. The last question that I have for everybody, with all of that in mind, is this game, does it need to be attended to, or do we need to let it breathe a little more? We've only had it for a month. We're always figuring out more and more about these games. You know, how much are people even using drive reversal at this point? Do you even know the command for drive reversal off the top of your head is a valid question right now as I'm finding and talking to people. Do you think it just needs more time, or is it time for developers already, as we understand it now, to come in and do some tidying up? John?
I do drive reversal all the time. It's -8 on block, so make sure you're punishing that if you do block it. And it is just, after you block, you hit forward in the heavy punch, heavy hit command, so you're not going to scrub me out there, Velociraptor.
John's a master, by the way, guys. and a Diamond 3 or 5 or something like that, so.
But anyway, I wanted this game attended to back in the beta. I wanted this specific issue attended to, the two things I've talked about, resources for drive rush and then the input eating. And like I said, I'm pretty disappointed in Capcom for missing those two things. The other issue I think is that the server stability sucks, at least for me. I've been winning multiple matches and then just the server eats it and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh great. Like, so if you actually win a match in Street Fighter 6 but the server didn't record it, did it actually happen? The answer is no, it did not. So, I think the game should be addressed sooner rather than later on this regard. Major balance changes, no, but minor balance changes, and you know, it could be up for debate how big of a change it is, but not having inputs eaten, like, that's a bug fix if you ask me. That's not even a balance change. That's called like, oh hey, we actually coded the game correctly so that doesn't happen. In terms of how much it takes, you could say that is a big adjustment, but I think it's more on the kind of moderate to medium side. So if it takes a bar and a half or 2 bars, I think it would be perfectly fine to roll that out, like say after Evo or something. So my vote would be sooner rather than later. If you know this is a sore thumb, get it addressed right now. And worry about, you know, rebalancing Lily and of course Rashid the moment he comes out, because he's going to be a problem, and all this other kind of stuff. Do that a little bit later down the road.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how I would do it, but the like 1.5 bars sounds kind of appealing to me for a neutral drive rush nerf. But I think even more so that maybe even just a little bit of damage scaling if you start your combo after a drive rush situation. But that's kind of hard to do because maybe they're just using the extra plus frames that they got on the block, and then it's the move after that that actually opens you up. I'd have to sit and think and mess around with it a little bit, but both of those ideas to me sound like they're pretty appealing. Again, it's early and I'm not certain, but if I were to gun to my head, I would say let's mess around with making it a little more expensive or a little more scaled to begin with. I think that would be okay right now, and I would say maybe no more throw loops in the corner. Let's have a little more honesty there, because that interaction just doesn't feel super rewarding and satisfying. Steven, what do you think on this last point here?
Yeah, I think that the input drops and stuff like that, I think that's a given. I feel like anybody who argues against not fixing that is kind of like, it's a moot point, because it's like, of course, fix that, right? Like input drops, it should be fixed. As John was saying, it's a bug fix, right? I think throw loops should definitely be gone because it just, like you said, like let's be a little bit more, let's have a little bit more honest play here, because it's a thing, and it's definitely a bit of a sore thumb right now for sure. And then in terms of drive rush, I say that raw drive rush should be the highest priority in terms of like what they look at changing, because I think that is definitely the biggest like black eye on this game right now. And again, I would like to kind of see if I had to make that decision right now, I'd say balance patch after Evo, of course, and increase the requirement for raw drive rush in neutral to 2 bars, and then like I said, but keep it at 1 bar if you're doing it in a juggle combo, because I still really like that, and I think that's really cool. And for all the corner carry stuff, again, you are cooking your meter, so you're getting closer to burnout. There is some consequence for it. But I do like the idea of making it maybe 2 bars for neutral drive rush, just because you're not going to get as much out of it. Like it'll be a thing. You can definitely get in there and get your pressure on and stuff, but you're going to have to think twice before you just kind of keep doing it and abusing it, right? Which is what you want. You want it to be more of a calculated thing. It shouldn't be gone entirely, but it should definitely be more calculated, and there should be more consequence for doing it versus just 1 bar. It's like, that's a bit much. So if I had to make that call, I think that would be the case. And then if perfect parry becomes this big thing down the road, which I kind of feel like the developers were afraid it would be, which is why they make it scale so hard, then we kind of revisit it then, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe now raw drive rush is just pointless. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we can kind of look at it again then. But as of right now, I'd say probably nerf it and increase the resources you need to do it in neutral at least.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that's wrapping us up mostly. I'm kind of speaking slowly in case anyone had a really important last point they wanted to make, but no one's jumping in,
yeah,
so...
I'll just say I love throws, and you know what? You guys suck for saying that throw loop should be gone. Throws are the best thing that's ever happened to Street Fighter. I'm a Street Fighter 2 player. I love to throw people. If I can end you with a throw, I would love to do it. And even then, even as much as I love throws, I actually think throw loop should be gone too. I will just mention that as well. So.
All right, if you guys want to throw some shade at Catalyst in the comments, we always enjoy that. Also, if you wanted to answer any of the questions that we threw around here, how do you feel about Street Fighter 6 being scrubby, being the scrubbiest, and where would you attend to it, if anywhere, to make it a better game? And that might just be let it air out. That might be we need to jump in right now and tweak around some frame data and some advantages, some damage scaling, that kind of stuff. But let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I've been John Velociraptor Guerrero. This has been John Catalyst Gray and Steven Dream King Chavez. Thank you so much, and we will see you guys in the next video.